Welcome to the Founder to Leader podcast, where we unpack the human and relational dilemmas founders face when leading scaling organizations. I'm Johanna. I'm your host and program manager for the leadership development program with the same name, Founder to Leader. And in each episode, I'm joined by a founder, a researcher, and a leadership coach, each bringing their own unique perspectives to the dilemma. So let's get started. Welcome to the Founder to Leader podcast. In this episode, we are talking about authority, from feeling overwhelmed by external advice, to the disappointment of a first senior hire, to the fear of bulldozing your team. I'm excited to introduce you to our three guests. I have Smoraczewska Harris, Rasmus Johnsen, and Mia Jung with me here in the studio. I'll start with you, Ella. You are the founder and the CEO of Uvisa, an innovative women's health device company. And you are developing a first-of-its-kind, light-based, drug-free solution for vaginal infections. And you have also been recognized as one of Denmark's top 25 female entrepreneurs to know in 2025 by the Danish Chamber of Commerce. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And while you, Ella, you will share a founder's lived experiences, you will bring the research understanding, Rasmus. You are an associate professor and a vice dean of lifelong learning at Copenhagen Business School, and your work on leadership and organizational understanding gives you a deep insight into how authority is projected, shared, and resisted in organization, which is exactly what we need in today's conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
And Mia, you will bring the leadership coaching perspective. You are the head of leadership development at Copenhagen Business School, as well as a leadership coach. And over the years, you have coached more than 200 startup and scale-up founder leaders, drawing on both your background in organizational development and also your own founder experience. So thank you also to you for being here.
Thank you.
I am so excited to have all of you three here and have this conversation around authority today, which in my experience is a topic that many founders have very mixed feelings about. So I can't wait to hear your perspectives. And because I can't wait, I'm thinking that we're going to dive right into the first dilemma. And before I read that out loud, I also just want to make a quick disclaimer that all the names in the dilemmas are made up. All right, so for our first dilemma, we have Sophie, and she is feeling overwhelmed by external advice. So Sophie says, I am a co-founder and CEO and all new to this startup world. Even if we have very quickly gotten some traction with our business, I often feel doubtful if I'm the right person to lead the rest of the team. I founded this company on some research I did that academically is quite groundbreaking, but I feel lost when it comes to being a CEO of a company. There's a lot of senior mentors and advisors who are all very keen to get involved and give advice. But quite frankly, it feels more exhausting than helpful, and I feel it's often a waste of my time to run after the balls that is thrown at me. But I also feel guilty not listening to all these people that are trying to help me. How do I navigate this without hurting their feelings? So Ella, I imagine that you have heard your fair share of advice from external people. So what comes to your mind when you hear Sophie's dilemma?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind is I could have written that dilemma myself. And I think it's really common that we, as founders, particularly in the early days, we don't know what we're doing, right? So it's really common to feel that, what we call it, imposter syndrome, don't we? That we don't really believe in ourselves and our abilities. So we do lean on others, and it's hard to navigate it. And I've learned this the hard way myself, as you said. I did all the accelerators, I signed up for all the mentorship programs, and it got to the point where I was overwhelmed and thought, I just can't keep doing all of this. I'm trying to please everybody all of the time. So I've learned to be more selective with who I choose, but it's taken time.
How do you today then navigate and decide which advice to follow and which ones not to follow?
So there's a combination of things. There's leaning into my own authority, which I learned to do through the help of the Founder to Leader program, and learning to trust my own gut and knowledge and experience, because actually I do have a wealth of it. I just didn't know how to trust it before. So there's learning to do that and sort of being comfortable with sitting in the discomfort initially of doing so. And then I also think, from a practical standpoint, I think sometimes it can be helpful to actually think about, well, what skills and competencies do I have and which don't I have? So where do I need advice? And where are the areas that actually I should be seeking input? And then where are the areas that actually I can just say, thank you for your advice and move forward.
And I think what's interesting with this dilemma as well is that she actually already knows that a lot of the advice isn't useful, but she feels very guilty ignoring it. And I'm curious, Mia, is that a tension that you see often in your coaching sessions?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think it kind of enhances each other in some ways, right? When you have a lot of people who really wants to give advice and feel useful and helpful, and they have a big drive to be supportive, which a lot of luckily mentors and advisors want to. They're also driven to make a difference. I guess we are all, to some extent, are driven to make a difference. And then at the same time, they want to be helpful, and maybe they don't always see that this person doesn't need help. And it can create this dynamic where it feels like you kind of need help, but then you don't really. And there's a bit of ambivalence about that. And then it can feel as if you need it, but then you don't really. And there's a bit of internal friction in that. And I think also what stands out to me in this dilemma is like, why is it important to not hurt their feelings? So sometimes also applying a little bit of rational lens on it. Is it really important? The mentors and the advisors. Is it important that they don't get their feelings doesn't get hurt? Is that really her job? I mean, as a founder, you have so many other things that are, taking space inside of you. I mean, there's plenty of stuff to feel guilty about. Maybe hurting advisors' feelings shouldn't be one of them.
Mhm. And it's also to some degree, it sounds like a fantasy, right? Because she also doesn't know that her saying no to advice will hurt their feelings.
Absolutely, that can be a projection that you might, but it can also be real. It can also be like their need to feel helpful. That's very strong, and wanting to put her in a position of being in need of help. And sometimes there's also that kind of dynamic at play in those relationships. So there's also power and positioning and like
Mm.
tons of other dynamics under the surface of this that is influencing the dynamic
Mm.
between them.
You said learn to trust your authority. And this is an open question to all of you. What does learn to trust your authority mean? And how do you do it? A very simple question. I'm just going to throw it out
Yeah,
there.
dude.
Now everyone's looking at me. No, I'm happy to have a go at that. So I think maybe just for summarizing, I think what I hear in the dilemma are two very interesting challenges. One, that the swirl of advice is pulling her in too many directions. So something that should be empowering is actually exhausting instead. And then a sort of guilt related to that Mia also points to, that she feels responsible towards those who wants the best for her, which is also important, right? And I think from a perspective, basically, of developing an authority to make that choice, the difficulty is if that responsibility lands with you personally alone, right? Because on what grounds should I then, decide what is right for me, what is not right for me, whether I hurt people's feelings or don't hurt people's feelings, whether I have the responsibility for caring for them or not, right? So the first criteria might be to look at what can help me or support me in making that decision. And I think from my perspective, a helpful tool is to think about the difference between what we can call technical challenges and adaptive challenges. So a technical challenge, in a sense, is a challenge to which there is a solution somewhere already in the world. You just need to look for it. You need to find it. In this case, you could say that it would be to manage the flood of input, what the dilemma is asking for. Can someone please help me manage the flood of information, right? But I'd like to shift that rather towards the more difficult task, which I think is also leadership work as such, namely defining what kind of CEO she wants to be, right? Now, that's not easy. It's not an easy task, but it's a task that, in a sense, moves us beyond the imposter syndrome, because it's the ongoing work of leadership. It's not something that you need to prepare before you become a leader. In a sense, it is what leadership work is, the ongoing work of understanding which kind of CEO you want to be or to become. And in the process, I think, of figuring out what can help you define that? What can help you, support you in the situation of understanding how to build your authority around that? You could say you need to return to the reasons for making the company or founding the organization to begin with. Like, what are the basic values that this was built on?
I think I think it's super interesting what you're saying as well. Um, like what kind of CEO do I want to be, and that is the work to be done to make it more dynamic. Because what I see very often are also this very sort of black and white. Am I? Do I have the potential to be a CEO, or do I not have it? Like if it's some kind of something that you're born with. That there's this perception that either you are or you're not. Am I the right one, or do I need to find another one? More than it's not so black and white. It's something you can also develop, and you can find your own voice in it. And moving away from that, there's this one way of being a good CEO. I see it very often with people with domain expertise, or people who doesn't have a business background or technical co-founders. Sometimes they are doing some kind of deep tech work, and they have this identity. I'm not CEO potential. I don't have that. And sometimes they're also being told that you cannot be a CEO, or you need to have someone who can be the CEO, which is also very kind of deauthorizing, right? Because what if they actually can develop those capabilities? I mean, founders are really good at learning new stuff. So why also not learn how you kind of take on that leadership role? I think there's a really important point in what you're saying here.
And I think these are really interesting points, and some that I'd considered actually when hearing this dilemma. Because what is a CEO? You know, what does it mean to be a CEO? A CEO's responsibility is to move a company forward and to achieve the goals and make success in that company. That's the ultimate responsibility of the CEO, is the company's success. And there isn't a one size fits all. And that's really important. Some of the best founders and leaders that I know are people that do things slightly differently. And I think as humans, we have this quite bad, actually, habit of going, oh, well, that's how things have always been. So that's how we'll carry on doing them, and that's not where we drive things forward. It's not where innovation happens. It's that just really keeps us stagnant. And I think it's really important to think about getting out of that mold and being true to your values, like you said as well, Rasmus, thinking about, why did I start this company? What is the company objective? What is my objective within this? And then how do I lead from that standpoint?
I would like to go a bit more practical as well with this dilemma, because the question is, how do I navigate this without hurting their feelings? So I want to talk a bit about like boundary setting, because it sounds like it's quite risky. It feels risky for Sophie to filter out or kind of push back on advice. So what are some ways that she can respectfully set boundaries with these senior or people that she perceived to be senior to her? Is at least how I'm reading the dilemma.
Personally, I had chairman of my board who I really respected and really valued, and his inputs were fantastic, but I wasn't able to really take those inputs in at the time. And he left the board saying that he didn't feel valued and that he didn't feel that I was listening, or not that I was listening, but he didn't feel valued. And for me, that really upset me, because I did value him. I just wasn't able to show it at the time. I didn't have the capacity. I was on maternity leave. I had a baby to care for, and it just wasn't working. But it was really important for me to not destroy that relationship, because he is somebody that I respect. And I mean, if you look back, it's kind of like a parent relationship. You want their approval. I know there's a lot of that going on for me personally. But we don't have a bad relationship now, because I have gone to him and said exactly this. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to show you that I valued you at that time. I really did value you. There was too much going on for me. It wasn't about you. Thank you for everything that you did for me. And I think that we have a good relationship now. But at the time, it really worried me, thinking that this person as well is influential. They could actually harm the business if they negatively talk about me or the company or whatever. So there is that aspect as well. Like, why is it important not to hurt their feelings? I typically try not to burn bridges and upset people, because you never know their sphere of influence.
But I also think that part of taking on a leadership role is being ready to disappoint people, right? Because you can't do everything. You can't manage everything. You can't meet all expectations. In my line of work, we often speak of dancing on the edge of your authority, right? And I think in the case that we're talking about here, there might be a difference between chasing authority, which is living up to the expectations, and having the guts, if you will, to disappoint. Which I think, if you talk about like practically, what I wrote was, thank your advisors and explain transparently what choices you made about what to do, and then let go of the guilt. Because part of your job as a leader is also to disappoint expectations.
I also had that written down. You don't have to be rude to say thank you very much for your advice and then not follow the advice.
I also think that there's some aspect of considering it one step before. Why does she even have those many mentors? Like maybe she could have said no. Maybe she had like a gut feeling that I don't really need it, but I feel obliged to take them on. And when you then there, you sort of feel again that you have to listen to their advice because now that's the role relations that you're in. But even considering and saying no to people who want to get in and advise you from the very beginning and saying like, actually, I don't have capacity to to act on your very useful advice. We have some other things we need to focus on, and also already there in the process, setting your boundaries and saying like, I don't need any more advisors because there are a lot of advisors who wants to support founders and startups. There's also a lot of money in the ecosystem as well that is
Exactly.
incentivized to advise because then they can prove their impact and that's their job. So, but also sometimes saying like, actually, I'm at capacity. I don't actually need to have an advisor, and also maybe to avoid being in this kind of committed relationship where you can still have advisors without like establishing this very formal. Now you are my advisor in a fixed period of time, but just be like, well, can we have a coffee? Can I pick your brain? Where you're not committed to do it one more time.
I think one thing that you're saying, Mia, that I've at least resonates with me is trying to make the challenge that you are working with more concrete, right? So moving again from becoming a CEO to maybe training the capacity to discern between relevant advice and noise, which I think is what you're pointing to also. People who advise have also often their own personal interest in becoming advisors, maybe even their own businesses at stake. So the capacity, in a sense, to discern between those different interests or difference between interests, I think is an important capacity of leadership.
Absolutely. So if I am to summarize, and if we are to then answer Sophie's question of how do I navigate this without hurting their feelings? First of all, consider who you actually have as advisors, and it's okay to say no to have advisors and mentors. Also know what you are good at and not, and kind of let that guide what you ask for advice for. You can say thank you to the advice and still not use it. That's perfectly fine. Ask yourself, is it your job to not hurt their feelings? You have a lot of other tasks. Is that the most important one? And also ask yourself, what kind of CEO do you want to be? And it is common that when you step into your own authority, it often also feels like disappointing other people.
Yeah, and trusting that she knows her stuff means she's very accomplished. Like a founder in an early stage of that kind is also a product person, and the knowledge that she has from her own research is the product. Even if she's a CEO, that knowledge is invaluable, and not doubting the value that she's the source.
Yeah. And also a nudge to all the startup supporters out there and the advisors and the mentors. Maybe start collecting a bit more data before handing out advice and opinions and recommendations, and ask yourself why you want to give advice in the first place as well. I think in Founder to Leader, we practice active listening as a core leadership tool, right? And I think that's also something we as startup supporter can practice much more intentionally that we already do, so that we don't waste founders' time.
100%. I was asked to be a mentor for another founder recently. And one thing that I try to actively practice is saying, do you want my input on this? it doesn't matter if I'm sitting in a room being asked to mentor. It's like, do you specifically want my input on this? But she actually, I will just add, she actually emailed the mentorship group that I was a part of recently and said, thank you so much, guys, for being mentors to me. However, I've taken on too many mentors and thank you so much for your time, but I can't do this anymore. And I thought, wow, I have so much respect for you, knowing that, owning it. Are my feelings hurt? Not at all. But you've set your boundaries. So well done.
And with that, I'm going to move on to our second dilemma. A quick note, this podcast is brought to you by Founder to Leader, Denmark's most established leadership development program for founders with personnel responsibility. The program combines organizational psychology with experiential learning and is delivered by Copenhagen Business School and the Danish Industry Foundation. It's free to participate, so read more and apply at foundertoleader.dk. And that is Mikkel, who is feeling disappointed by his first senior hire. So he says, I run a B2B SaaS, and after having bootstrapped for 3 years, we finally hired our first senior sales lead. I had really hoped that this would allow me to give away some of the pressure of worrying about sales and revenue so that I could focus on other things. But now that he's here, I don't think he's living up to my expectations at all, and sales aren't progressing as fast as I expected. Things are going very slow, and I've started questioning if he's even worth the big salary that we're paying him. I have told him these things, but still don't see the progress that I want. What would you recommend me to do? So, Rasmus, when you hear this dilemma about Mikkel feeling disappointed by his first senior hire, what stands out to you?
I think the right thing to do in this is to figure out to which extent this person is the right one and to which extent I am having difficulties giving away responsibility.
But I think this is very, very classical because, as founders, we just have to kind of trust that the people we hire, they have to be the right ones. And that it costs a lot of money, and like money is not really a resource that you have as a startup. So there's a lot of hopes in the hires that you have. You really hope that they are going to be the right one, that they are going to solve all the problems of the company, because now you are really taking big risk by paying them salary. And then I think it's very easy to get a little bit too hopeful and sometimes forget about the fact that everyone needs leadership, everyone needs guidance, and you just like bring them in and then you just hope they will take off from day one. No one can really do that without knowing what's a task, how does good look like, how do they get started. It's basically just being thrown out in the deep and saying like, go. And I think it can be very boundaryless, even for a senior person who might be very accomplished in structures where established companies that have structures for sales and processes and whatnot, and then suddenly they're just like completely in a boundaryless setting, and they just have to perform from day one with a lot of pressure, and they also feel that on their shoulders, like I need to do something, but I don't really know exactly what. And I also feel the disappointment. I also feel the hopes, and I think that can be a tricky situation. So maybe also pause and look at what am I putting into this person? How can I also maybe be a little bit more realistic about what can I expect and what does it require from me to have this person perform?
I completely agree. And I think expectations, the bit in the dilemma that caught my attention was him saying, I don't think he's living up to my expectations. And expectations are funny things, right? Because we have them, but unless we communicate them, other people might not know them, or they might be miscommunicated or misunderstood. So I think, like you say, clear is kind. And often we are not clear with our expectations at all. So that is a really important thing to remember and think about with leadership, particularly, and with team members, because I actually don't think necessarily that this person is immediately not the right person. I think that there's a lack of clarity around what is expected. And also, let's be realistic, in the startup world, that founder has been, making slide decks with crazy hockey stick sales projections for years, and all of a sudden he's in the real world, and the hockey stick doesn't happen overnight, So I think there's some of that as well. I think there's a bit that some of the expectations are probably not realistic, and then some of the expectations have not been clearly articulated. and it is difficult. You, as a leader, especially as a founder, you do it all yourself. But there comes a point where you have to have more processes. You have to have structures in place. I recently, 2 days ago, sat down with one of my first hires. He's now my chief product officer. He's a member of my senior leadership team. But I had to sit down with him and give him some objectives and key results to work towards. He's never had that before in the year and a half that we've worked together. But we're a team now which all needs a bit more clarity because we're of a size where we all need to ensure that we're aligned. So it's just a case of sitting down and saying, this is what I expect of you. And that's so uncomfortable for me to actually use those words. I expect you to do this. It feels too authoritative, too commanding, bossy, if you like. But people need it. They need to know where the boundaries are and where their limits are and where they need support and where they don't.
But then I'm also curious because here in the dilemma, he says that he has already raised concern, but still doesn't see progress. And of course, we have no idea how that conversation went. Maybe Mikkel thinks it's been very clear and the senior hire would say something different. But how do you know when to assert authority more strongly and when to conclude that it might not even be the right fit, actually?
Well, I think, to my mind, maybe you're sticking to one version of authority, which I think, in a sense, might be the challenge here also, right? The idea, in a sense, that he has authority and he has to exert authority, and then the question becomes more about to which extent he should exert authority. But we could also shift the focus and say it's about a move from I do it all to others' own key parts. And the challenge, of course, with that is then the organization that you are part of, that you founded, is not only yours anymore. And whatever it does is not only of your making anymore, right? And I mean, to be very practical, you could say one way to approach a conversation like that is the indignation that lies in the description of the dilemma is, why don't you deliver, right? There's a certain sense of disappointment, perhaps also hurt because, there's so great expectations. So they say, why don't you deliver? And maybe rephrase it rather towards, what do you see that I don't? Right? A curiosity towards that person that also has clear expectations of that person, that hire, delivering something. And that's a process that takes time.
Yeah, I think that curiosity is super important also to be curious about, like, kind of installing a mindset like, how can I be curious about it all? How can I understand what is preventing this person from performing, and maybe have a conversation that is, again, less black and white about performing, not performing, but maybe a bit more like, what is preventing? What is difficult? What's the challenge here? Because we actually don't really know. Maybe the product isn't quite ready to scale sales wise. Maybe there's also very concrete challenges there, or maybe it hasn't been communicated clear because someone like the founder doesn't want to be perceived as bossy, or like it's in their head and they are like kind of thinking, well, surely he must understand that I'm not happy, or that I would have expected X, Y, and Z results at this point. But there's a lot of potential to be curious about the blockers.
And just to add, great leaders don't sit people down and say, you must do this, 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 and this. They work together with their team, their people, to progress things. I've actually been in this situation myself personally. So prior to being a founder, I was a senior sales executive, and I had somebody working for me who was a junior sales guy, and he wasn't performing. He wasn't hitting his targets in his first few months. And my boss was saying to me, Ella, you're going to have to fire him if he doesn't improve. And actually, he didn't need me sitting him down and saying, hey, you need to sell more. He needed me to help him and for me to share my knowledge and my experience that he could learn from that worked with the customers, and he turned it around. So there's some of that as well. And I think you exactly made the right point of like, what is authority? Different types of authority. There's authority in sharing wisdom. There is authority in sharing experience and coaching and helping. It's not necessarily just instructing.
But I'm a bit curious then. So, what new leadership skills are needed to share authority effectively with senior hires then, compared to maybe junior hires?
I think there's often the misconception that just because you are a senior profile and coming into a startup, you don't need any guidance and support. You still need that. It's still a new context. You're still new to that company. You're still new to being in a startup, and most likely you're also pretty new to being um, in this very boundaryless way of doing your job. So even if you've done one-to-one the job somewhere else, there's not going to be the same structures or the support system around. You're not going to have the same resources, and everything is just like only half ready. You don't have this like really nicely visual identity that you can just use, or you don't have all these kind of levers that you can work with. So it is quite different, and because things are always a little bit kind of temporary and in progress, it also becomes difficult to navigate. And I think maybe sometimes it's even harder for a senior person to go in because they have these preconceptions of how things are supposed to be. So they actually need to have this kind of meta reflection with the founder, say like, well, this is different, and how is it different, and how are you to be filling your role in a different way. So being a lot more explicit about how things are different, I think, is really important when hiring senior people, because junior people, they don't have these preconceptions. They just show up.
And one way I think maybe to extend that thought is to say that much of the junior-senior discussion is part of formal hierarchies, right? And formal hierarchies also comes with preconceived understandings of what authority is. That someone who's been there longer has more authority than someone who's new to the job. But we also know, once we go into that discussion, that it's much more murky than that. Yeah, that someone who steps up or steps in or makes a difference can actually assume leadership. But assuming leadership also claims followership, right? And we need people who follow leaders also to grant that leadership. So there's a whole process, in a sense, of co-creating the space of leadership in that goes way beyond the hierarchies or the formal titles that we have. And I think that process in itself is both difficult but also ongoing.
So if I am to put it together, so the recommendations then for Mikkel is that everyone, also senior hire, need leadership, support, and guidance too. Be clear with your expectation and make them realistic, but also communicate them clearly. And with that, also be very curious about how the senior hire experience the situation as well. And remember that authority also is in coaching and in collaborating and in supporting as well. It's not only telling people what to do. Anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, I think I'd be even more practical than that. I mean, I'd suggest in this case, co-create a 90-day roadmap. You need time to do that, where in a sense you pause all those thoughts about whether this is the right person or not, because part of it is figuring out whether this is the right person or not, but part of it is also figuring out whether you are just now learning to let go. And you need time to do that, right? So is there a possibility for you together with the new hire to co-create a 90-day roadmap with checkpoints and clear goals, and then stick to that, and then evaluate after 3 months?
Amazing. Let's move on to our third and our last dilemma. And that is with John, who is afraid of bulldozing his team. So John writes, I am a manager of 10 full-time employees, and one of the things that challenge me is that I'm afraid that I sometimes run over my employees. I really don't want to be perceived as a micromanager, so I often avoid being very direct with my opinion when my employees are going a bit off track. Despite that, I think that my employees feel when I don't agree with their decisions, because often I don't. There have been a few instances when I didn't manage to hold myself back, and I ended up doing the task myself for it to be done right. Afterwards, I felt ashamed, like I bulldozed everyone. It's not that I don't want to trust people. I know that that's important, but I can also see that my employees rarely have the full picture of what needs to be done. Any advice? So Mia, in your experience as a leadership coach, is it common that this fear of being too strong or too direct get in the way of authority?
Yes, I think this is maybe one of the most common things I hear with founders in particular. And I think this is maybe one of the things where founders are a little bit different in their way of being leaders. Because they are the creator of the company. They are the source of everything that exists today. So in that sense, it's also very clear that they have a direction, they have a certain vision, and some of it might be explicit, but some of it is also just felt in their body and in their soul. And it's, I think it's very easy to feel that you almost become one with your company. And that's a process to let go of. It's a process that will take a lot of time as you get the new hires. You need to let go of some of the tasks as we're talking about, but also more from an identity perspective. Um, you learn maybe going to like CBS or some other leadership course or any other. You read some articles that you're supposed to be trustful and you're supposed to create a great culture and listen and be a good leader. And there's so many things that you need to live up to. But at the same time, you have this friction inside of you where you have a drive and you are, so resourceful and you want to create change and you're driven by all of these things. And it's so powerful in so many ways when you're working with founders as leaders. And I think what is also a really important thing here is to turn the perspective a little bit around and say, like, this is very clearly a person who thinks a lot about um, not being a bulldozer and maybe holding back a bit too much. And sometimes in the desire of wanting to be the good manager, the good leader, they let go of too much. So maybe they have also hired some people who are a bit too sensitive for, the signals and the things that they're trying to send out and convey. And they might also need to find some that are a bit more cultural fit so they can build up a culture where it's possible to have those conversations where you can say, like, well, actually, I need this to be a little bit more like that without it being a problem, without that they have to feel that they're holding back. Of course, it's always two-sided, right? Because, of course, you should look inwards, but sometimes you also need to look at, do I have the right fit with the people that is in my team? Because this is clearly not from a coaching perspective. I would say it's not sustainable that you're spending so much time feeling that you're wrong. It somehow needs to feel easier, whether that is kind of changing things in your own practice and letting go, or if it's a bit more creating an honest culture where it's possible to give the feedback when it's needed and to not hold back all the time, because I think founders' fire is a very important thing to not shut down.
Yeah. And it sounds like John Slem, it shows quite of a black and white mindset. So it sounds like his options are either that he's holding back or it's trying to hold back completely, or he bulldozes. So how can John and leaders in general, how can you build confidence in your own authority so you're going to learn how to operate between those two extremes, or you feel like you operate between those two extremes?
I mean, I can definitely talk about this because I think, again, I could have written this dilemma. So in the early days of Uvisa, I was completely hands off with my team. I just let them do their own thing because I thought, well, they don't need me micromanaging them and I don't want to bulldoze them. And of course, that's the right thing to do. It's not the right thing to do. People need leadership. And those people were left kind of floundering. What's expected of me and what is performing? I don't know. What goal are we all working to? Who knows? Right?
I don't.
Exactly. So that was not the right thing. And so over time, I have learnt to give better direction without not leaving room for any freedom in creativity or method. So it comes back to setting expectations, doesn't it? It comes back to, are we all heading towards that same goal? And are we clear on that goal? And ultimately, that is the job, I think, of the founder, well, maybe not of the founder, but of the leader. The leader's job is to clearly and often articulate the vision and the goal. How you get there, I mean, many paths lead to Rome, right? How you get there could be many things. But as long as everybody's clear on these are the things we're trying to achieve within this time frame, it typically gets a little bit easier to manage that. What's interesting here is that he says often he doesn't agree with their decisions and that they do things wrong. So then it comes back to questioning, well, what do you mean exactly by wrong? And that comes back to the goals and the targets. Is it helping you move towards that goal or target? Because if it is, it's not necessarily wrong. But maybe you didn't like the way they moved in the direction. And then you have to look inward. What's the issue here? Is it that that person has done something wrong? What? And again, we've covered this in coaching, but look at the data. What's the data telling you? Is that thing wrong, or is this just a personal taste issue that's more about you?
But it's so important, kind of. It's what I think is really difficult as a founder to make those expectations clear, because it's somehow maybe not crystallized, and it's felt. It's very kind of very clear inside of the founder. It's how they have thought the business come to life, and it's a feeling sometimes. It's a sense, and they need to find a way of putting language to that. How do they flip that to become clear expectations? I think this is the art, and this is where it's a bit more difficult for founder leaders, because in companies who are not founder led, that those things are typically written down. It's a little bit more like kind of clear, but with founders, it's inside of them, and the whole exercise is in kind of externalizing it, flipping it, so it's possible for other people to engage with what is inside and how that is being kind of envisioned inside.
On a practical level, then, it is about getting that from the inside to the outside, right? Like you said, in bigger companies, written down. Why can't it be in startups too? We very, very, very early wrote our company core values. It really helps to give people that ownership, because they're very clearly articulated. These are what drives us. If you're doubting something, look back to those. Is it covered? It helps you make decisions, because the decision has to be in line with those values.
And what is difficult in articulating values is also maybe articulating when they are in tension with each other. So in the case that we are talking about now, we both want high standards and we want team ownership, right? So in the first, in a sense, wanting high standards gives me one set of commitments and one set of entitlements, and the other team ownership does the same, and maybe they're in conflict, right? So what do we do then? Well, first of all, I think in naming the competing values or naming those tensions, saying I both want us to have high standards and I want team ownership, right? And one way of practically addressing that again, I think, would be to give the work back to the organization. What Mia said before, I think, is very important, that holding people accountable or being direct about expectations is not bulldozing. It's providing boundaries, and avoiding clarity actually disempowers people, right? So in a sense, finding a way to give the work back means, having clear standards, and instead of stepping in and doing things yourself, holding people accountable to those standards, and then maybe understanding that mistakes are also learning opportunities, right? So when people don't meet the standards, it's not necessarily because they're wrong. It may be because they need to learn what the standards are.
I also feel like one important aspect of this theme of authority here is that I feel a lot of, I definitely see a lot of founders have like a not very simple relationship to authority and to former authorities that they've been under. And I think that's a very kind of reoccurring theme. Parents, teachers, other authority figures throughout life, other bosses. A lot of founder, I wouldn't say most, but I would tend to say most, but a lot of founders, they really have not had the best experiences with other authority figures. And I think that sometimes plays into being really afraid of being a micromanager. So they become the opposite. So they overregulate to avoid becoming what they have experienced themselves. And they need to maybe move a little bit further into the middle to be kind of clear leaders. But that aspect of constantly being afraid that you'll become that authority figure that you really don't want to be. I think that really maybe is also at play here in this dilemma, because it very often is in my experience.
And I want to continue a bit on that and ask you, Mia. So if you had John in your coaching room and would kind of help him find that more middle ground, if it is then that he might have some negative perception of authority, what could be some practical ways to do that?
Well, I think what you, Ella, also talked about. We talk a lot about this in the program. Like, what data do you have? Do you have any data on being too strict? Is there data that maybe they actually needed correction because they were going off track, and it was appropriate that you stepped in and corrected? Maybe do you have data that maybe they are actually capable of doing things, and really kind of looking at the reality and not just go back into your own fantasies of what you might imagine is going on, but really have a solid reality anchored perspective in the data.
I think maybe that's what we referred to earlier as dancing on the edge of your authority, right? I mean, sometimes to lean into experiments that are uncomfortable because you're vulnerable in the position to actually ask people, am I being too strict? Or on the other hand, experimenting with being a little stricter than you're comfortable with.
Thank you for that. So to summarize, the advice for John is look at the data that you have, collect the data, and also ask yourself curiously, is it that they actually didn't do the tasks that we're supposed to do that kind of drive the business forward? Or is it maybe that you just didn't like exactly the way that it was done? Write down things. So that can be values, the culture that you want to have in your organization. It can be guidelines, etc. And having high standards and holding people accountable to those standards is not bulldozing. It's setting boundaries, and boundaries empower your employees. And see mistakes that employees do as learning opportunities, because they're never going to learn if they don't actually get to try and fail and learn from that. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, maybe just one thing, don't expect revolutions, right? Small steps, incremental steps, experiments are much more valuable, although they take time. We want to hurry, we want to get there, we want success, we want it now, we want it to happen. And then we lean into explosions, right? But for someone who always takes the word at a meeting, silence is really difficult, but it's a good step.
Yeah, so it also comes back to not overcompensating, trying to learn about where can you maybe improve by taking a couple of steps towards the middle without ending up being completely wrong the way you are, and having an ideal that you need to be exactly the opposite, but rather saying like, well, it's okay that you are the way you are with all of those strengths, but you might have to sort of adapt a few things so you can move a couple of steps towards the middle.
And remembering that your job as the leader and the founder is not to do everything. It's to set the direction and to keep everybody heading in that same direction towards that same goal. We talk a lot about growth and scale in startups, or scaling. It's not scalable to correct everybody's work all the time, is it? So if you really want to create a successful company that scales and grows, at some point you have to let go of that.
It's a good way to end. Thank you so much, Ella and Rasmus and Mia, for being here. That was a super interesting discussion. And to everyone listening, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in to the Founders Leader podcast. I will speak to you next time. And remember to subscribe, review, and share if you liked what you heard. Thank you.